Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching the news at 10, broadcasting on Channels Television live from Lagos. Speaking of which, here are a few pictures that you sent into our Eyewitness portal. Let's begin with this one from Sulere here in Lagos, showing women whom our Eyewitness reporter says are protesting an alleged epileptic power supply and high tariff, which is not commensurate with what is supplied. Our next photo is from Ishola Salisu in Alimosho area of Lagos, showing the part of a drainage washed away by erosion. Our Eyewitness reporter wants the state government to fix it before it becomes worse. Similar to that is this image from Munia in Ibadan, the Oyo state capital, showing the section of a road washed away by erosion. Our next picture comes from Mowe area of Ogun State. This electricity pole, according to our Eyewitness reporter, has been in this state for some weeks. He wants men of the Power Holding Company of Nigeria to replace it before it makes the final fall. Our final picture is from Kubwa Phase 4 in Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory, showing a gridlock. Our Eyewitness reporter is appealing to the government to dualize the road to ease movement and, for the time being, enforce compliance with traffic rules, especially in the mornings. Thanks for sending in those pictures. Know that you too can become an Eyewitness reporter for Channels Television. Just follow the instructions on our website. Now, the federal government has reaffirmed its commitment to tackle corruption at all levels by enforcing accountability at all levels of governance. Speaking in Abuja at a one-day anti-corruption summit, the special advisor to President Muhammadu Buhari on research, Mr. Sylvester Manobe, notes that corruption has had some destructive impacts on the economy and impoverished Nigerians.
Addressing issues of corruption is the main focus of the Abuja Anti-Corruption Summit as financial experts, lawyers and activists brainstorm on how to curb the menace. Declaring the summit open, the special advisor to President Buhari on research lists the effects of corruption on the economy.
The impact of corruption on Nigeria has been described as life-threatening. Reports show that Nigeria is considered one of the poorest countries in the world, that income per capita is less than $500 and over 54% of the population living in absolute poverty.
Conveners of the summit appeal to all Nigerians and their foreign collaborators to team up with the federal government in its quest to stamp out corruption in the country.
At least $1 trillion is siphoned out of developing countries each year through shady deals, money laundering, and corruption. If even a portion of this stolen money was repatriated and invested in services and systems, it could help finance developing countries' own fight against extreme poverty.
Corruption is a way of life in Nigeria. That's the reality we live with. It is endemic and it is systemic. And what this does, therefore, is that what we're trying to do, what this administration is trying to do, is trying to tell Nigerians to find a new way of life. And that doesn't happen overnight.
Lending his voice to the fight, the head of the United Kingdom's Department for International Development in Nigeria says the fight against corruption requires global efforts.
No country is immune from corruption. Governments need to work together and with partners from business and civil society to tackle it successfully. We need to face this challenge openly and frankly if we are to fulfill our shared commitments under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, where we committed to substantially reduce corruption and bribery in all their forms.
Tackling corruption is no doubt vital for sustaining economic stability and growth. And it is for this reason that the Abuja Anti-Corruption Summit serves as a prelude to the 2016 International Anti-Corruption Summit coming up in London later this month.
And the citizens have greater opportunity.
After several buck passing between the presidency and the National Assembly, it appears the two arms of government have finally resolved areas of differences on the 2016 budget. Earlier this week, key officers of the National Assembly were at the presidential villa for deliberations on the passage of the budget. And I'll be joined on the news at 10 by Mr. Johnson Chukwu, a financial analyst and Chief Executive of Cowrie Assets Management. You're welcome to the news at 10.
My pleasure.
Great to see you. And there are indications the 2016 budget will be passed at least by the end of this week. Going by assurances from the National Assembly, if this does happen, how soon can we begin to see implementation?
Well, it depends on how quickly the ministers will address the issues related to compliance with the due process law. You know, basically, it's a due process law that you have to follow before you have disbursements. But I also know that in the budget, there's a provision of about 350 billion, which will be used to pay contractors. I want to believe those disbursements should come almost immediately. The budget is passed, because I want to believe the contractors have already submitted their certificates of completion, and they are waiting for their payment. So that will be the first thing that will come into the system. Then the balance of the 1.2, you know, the capital expenditure budget is about 1.457 trillion. The balance of the 1.2 trillion will now come as early as the ministers meet the due process rules for disbursement.
How long do you think that will take?
I want to believe that we are still going to have a lag of about a month or two before you see full implementation. Not full implementation, before you begin to see effective implementation of the budget. But the key thing you have to recognize is that the budget aspect that is not being implemented today is principally the capital expenditure budget. The capital expenditure budget of about 2.6 trillion is being implemented because government has continued to pay salaries. The budget of 1.475 trillion for debt service obligations is being implemented because government has continued to meet its debt service obligations. So what will happen newly as a result of the part of the budget would be the beginning of the start of implementation of the capital expenditure budget. And that's what I think we should expect its impact on the economy. The other recurrent expenditure have already been there. They are regular and they are consistent expenses that have been going on.
Yeah, it was just yesterday that the government said it would give priority to at least 34 projects. What critical areas do you think in the economy should be given priority, should be part of this project so the government will be implementing?
Well, the government mentioned the area that I think will be of most importance to Nigeria is the area of infrastructure. They mentioned specifically that they are considering the possibility of doing about 201,000 kilometers of roads or repairing existing roads, part of the 201 kilometers of roads. And that they will consider the possibility of adopting a PPP scheme, that's public-private partnership scheme. And I think that's the most critical factor. I was looking at a report that the DG of PENCOM said that we have a 23 trillion deficit in terms of infrastructure. We have a budget of 6 trillion. Of that 6 trillion, only 1.5 trillion relates to capital expenditure. If you bring in the state government capital expenditure, maybe you have 2 trillion for this year, when you have a deficit of about 23 trillion. So it simply means that current run rate, we will take 10 years to significantly close that gap in infrastructure. And we don't have that luxury of time because as you build, part of the infrastructure will also need to be repaired. Yeah. So we need public-private partnership to build infrastructure. And I think that's what has been missing. We need to come up with legal and commercial framework that will allow private sector to invest in those commercially viable infrastructure like road network, the seaports, the rail lines, the airports, and those ones that are bankable. And then the government can focus on the social infrastructure that are not good enough for the private sector to put their money in.
And now that the budget has been assented to, what impact do you think this will have on foreign investors, many of whom have been waiting on this budget?
I don't think the budget is what has kept foreign investors away from the country. If you look at the report from National Bureau of Statistics, that only $710 million came into the system in the first quarter of this year, capital importation. And that's a drop of about 54% from previous quarter on quarter. So if you consider that in the single quarter, we lost 54% of what we got the previous quarter. I think what is keeping away foreign investors is one, the issue of the exchange rate. That is very critical to them. Because once you impose capital controls, foreign investors will be afraid that they will not be able to take out their earnings when they invest in your country. And there's also a looming risk that ultimately Naira will be devalued. Because our current earnings cannot sustain the current exchange rate. So if those factors, two risks, are very apparent, then foreign investors will stay away from coming into your country at that point until those risks are materially addressed. And I think that's the most critical factors that are keeping away foreign investors, not just because the budget have not been passed.
Okay, so while we're waiting for the president to assent to the budget, there's a meeting going on right now in Abuja of African Central Bank governors. And I know they're meeting to address homogeneous impact of the global economy on the African economy. Just speak briefly about how the global economy is affecting us.
Well, I think two things have happened in the global economy that affect African economies. One, the crash in commodity prices have virtually affected almost all African economies. The second factor is the end of the quantitative easing in the U.S. that have made cheap money no longer available. Previously, when the quantitative easing was going on, a lot of funds were looking for outlets to invest in, and the African instruments became attractive. But that has reversed, and we're seeing a negative flow of capital away from Africa, added to the drop in the in prices of goods. That Africans can export, like crude, like metals. So you've seen that African countries are no longer earning as much foreign earnings as they used to earn, and therefore most of them are going through a balance of payment challenge. So those two issues are affecting Africa, and I think that's what the central bank governors want to see, how they can come up with policies that will mitigate the impact of end of quantitative easing, crash in commodity prices on their financial system to avoid the systemic risk associated with that.
Mr. Johnson Chuku, it's been a pleasure having you on the News at 10.
My pleasure.
We turn to the lawmakers. The House of Representatives has directed the Inspector General of Police to seal the Kogi State House of Assembly complex, pending when the crisis rocking the Assembly is resolved. This is one of the resolutions adopted by the House after considering the report of an ad hoc committee that investigated a declaration by the Attorney General of the Federation. Our correspondent Lanre Lasisi reports.
The meeting of the House of Representatives ad hoc committee on the Kogi crisis with the Inspector General of Police. The committee also met with the Attorney General of the Federation. The lawmakers are to investigate the declaration by the Attorney General that the resolution of the National Assembly taking over the duties of the Kogi State House of Assembly is illegal. The House is now considering the report of the committee. The chairman of the committee reads out some of their conclusions.
That the Attorney General was wrong in advising the Inspector General of Police to reopen the Kogi State House of Assembly after it had taken over by the National Assembly by operation of law. Second, that the Attorney General has no powers, none whatsoever, under the Constitution or any known law to reverse a decision made by the legislative arm of government, whether or not such decision was made rightly or wrongly.
The recommendations of the committee were then put to a vote.
That the Inspector General of Police should immediately reseal the Kogi State House of Assembly pending the resolution of the Kogi crisis. Recommendation 6, that all resolutions, laws, and action taken by the Kogi State House of Assembly from the date of the National Assembly resolution be declared null and void by operation of law. Recommendation 7, that the governor of Kogi State should immediately send his budget and other executive bills to the National Assembly for consideration as stipulated in Section 11 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999.
The House has also directed the Attorney General of the Federation to immediately withdraw his advice to the Inspector General of Police. The lawmakers are also asking that both officers be reprimanded for undermining the authority of the legislature. Lanre Lasese, Channels Television News.
When the News at 10 returns, Immigration Service Office in Abia State set to repatriate 76 illegal migrants. Please join us again.